Hey guys, this is Caspi with Tape, and today you join me for episode 2 of Realism Overhaul Project Luna. And today we're starting our manned program. So straight away I'm going to hand you over to past me in the VAB to talk you through our first vehicle in this program. So the first vehicle we're going to be launching today is the Daedalus 1. And we're in the VAB again, taking a look at the vehicle, because people seem to like this last time, and I like talking through the vehicle because they're interesting in Realism Overhaul. There's lots of cool parts. So yeah, and talking of parts, a lot of people ask me what mods I used. I did briefly mention last time, but I just installed the whole Realism Overhaul package with CCAN. So I download CCAN, I select Realism Overhaul and Real Solar System. It'll install both of those packages. Just install all of the required bits it tells you are required. I installed all of the things that said were suggested, and there were a few optional mods. I just installed a bunch of extra optional engines like FASA and Soviet engines and US engines and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's just a quick word on the mods. But anyway, yes, let's take a look at this vehicle, the Daedalus 1. So let's start at the first stage. The first stage of this is actually a solid rocket booster. This is the P-80 solid rocket booster. It is European, as you can see from the ESA sign on the side, and it's actually the first stage of the Vega launch vehicle in real life, and it provides 2,261 kilonewtons of thrust, but I've cut that down by a third just to reduce the thrust to weight ratio because we don't really need it for this. So yes, it's actually a very capable solid rocket booster, and I decided to use this because theoretically it would cut costs, not a real problem for me, but also it's interesting and it's launching a probe, so I thought, hey, let's give it a try, see what we can do with solid rocket booster for first stages. Now this does have some winglets on it for helping it to turn and also for keeping it stable, but the booster does actually gimbal, so we didn't really need kind of turning winglets. But yeah. So that's the first stage, and then the second stage starts with an engine here. This is a, what's it called? It's a LE5 series engine. This is actually a Japanese engine and is used on the second stage of the H2 launch vehicle, which is, I think, their current launch vehicle, or I think it might be the H2B variant, which is the one that Japan is launching. Yeah. And this provides 103 kilonewtons of thrust and uses hydrolox, which is hydrogen and liquid oxygen. So yeah, that's the rocket. You can see each stage provides about 5,000 meters per second of thrust, and that's because it's launching quite a light payload, really. So if we move this second stage and look inside the fairing, we can see the payload. What is this mysterious little satellite? Is it another doomed to fail communication satellite? It's actually not. This is the first test in our manned program. Because, well, we need to see how things fare on re-entry. So this little probe is designed to test re-entry under this decoupler. There is a heat shield, and then there's a fairly basic guidance unit, a 1 meter guidance unit. There's a little bit of fuel and some engines for deorbiting. There's 4 solar panels because kind of why not, really. A couple of parachutes, a reaction wheel, and a couple of these bar antennas. There's 2 of them just so it's balanced. But yes, this will be dropped into the atmosphere to test re-entry, and that's all it will do. Let's go and see how well that goes now. Yes, so here we are on the pad with the Daedalus 1. Daedalus, of course, because it will be probably flying far too close to, well, not the sun, but a lot of hot stuff, so whatever, it's sort of, it's a fine name. Anyway, yes, so we're launching on top of the Vega solid rocket booster, and it's giving us lots of thrust. We're actually picking up speed pretty quickly, tipping over quite well. You can see the gimbal working there. The fins are also helping to turn, actually. That's quite useful, really. And yeah, so now we're up at 22 kilometers at 45 degrees, trying to take a relatively shallow approach so that we can kind of get an idea of how the re-entry will be from a low orbit. We're taking on quite a lot of heating here, but I think we're fine. The solar rocket booster kind of almost burning out now. You can see the plume from Real Plume has gotten pretty thin. That'll happen as the atmosphere dissipates. Now the booster burns out and is slowly running out of thrust as it throttles down. Now it's safe to decouple, and we'll do that now. Deploy the fairings, and here we go on that liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen stage. That should should be more than enough to push us all the way on into orbit. It actually could take us much higher. This is quite a decent rocket, and might actually, if I need to launch some other satellites for some reason, I might just use this because It's very capable, although this is a very light payload since it's pretty much a heat shield and a probe and a few other things. But yeah, a good test of the vehicle at least. Now we're getting up to around 7.5 kilometers per second, and we'll be in orbit in no time. And then there we are. I think yes, we're in orbit, and now we can decouple the payload from the rocket and test all of the systems to make sure it's all working, and we can indeed deorbit this almost straight away in about half an orbit's time and complete the mission. Now the decoupler for some reason is actually stuck to the probe, and I decouple it and it gives me a nice kick in the opposite direction, which is actually pretty useful because it gets us away from the second stage. Now we're just testing out the engines. There's no plume, but you can see the thrust is working when we throttle up, which is rather nice. And yeah, now we're in actually a slightly steep orbit, but it should be fine. On the other side of the orbit now, we're going to perform our Deorbit Burn. We've throttled up. You can't see the plume, annoyingly. I guess there just isn't a plume for this engine, but you can see our periapsis decreasing over Florida. Hopefully we'll land somewhere. Well, it'd be nice to land in the Gulf of Mexico, but I think we'll probably land on land. So yeah, 17 kilometers is what I'm going for. That seems to be what I remember working from last time. And yeah, now I'm going to go for a deorbit. I actually was going to install some visual mods for this episode, but some people were like, yeah, you need some visual mods, some clouds and stuff. And I did get it working after quite a while, because when I used to do this, it was a matter of just installing the cloud mod and changing a few numbers to get the height right of the clouds. But it was a little more complicated, and when I finally did get it working, it had some kind of memory leak, and my computer crashed. It filled up about 12 gigabytes of RAM. So I'm going to keep working on that, try and get some clouds and stuff in this, but the setup I was trying to use clearly is broken in some way. But yes, we will have visual mods at some point, hopefully. Anyway, back to the actual mission. The re-entry is going pretty well. You can see the ablator slowly burning off and the charred ablator filling up. I don't know why it stores charred ablator, I guess just for a mass thing. But yeah, now we're coming down. Looks like we'll land either in Mexico or actually probably southern Texas, assuming we do get through re-entry, which is looking like we will. This stood up very well. I don't know what I expected. I mean, the heat shield works. But 70 kilometers seems to be a good place to put your periapsis to get a good deorbit. And yeah, it looks like we actually are landing in Texas, I think. My geography's not great, but I think so. And we've been communicating with the Brownsville, Texas antenna, I think. Anyway, the parachute's deployed now and will soon be on the ground. That went very well. Clearly, the heat shields work fine, and 70 kilometers is a good periapsis. So, now let's start testing the manned vehicle. The first thing we're going to need is a launch escape system, because I crash a lot. Now, this one was using two boosters on top of that launch escape system, as you could see. One at 100% thrust, one at 50% thrust. It was a little bit too much, and it spanned too much, so now I've throttled the one on the left up to 84%, and that actually looks pretty good. That'll drag us sideways enough that it'll get us away from an exploding vehicle, but doesn't spin us too much that it'll just drag us back into it. However, at that altitude, we couldn't slow down in time, and the pod exploded. So, we've strapped this to a solid rocket booster. This is all probe controlled, by the way, so that we don't kill Kerbals, as we would have in both of those scenarios just then. And this is just going to go up a few kilometers, and then we're going to try the launch escape system. So yeah, I thought I'd just show you a bit of this testing, because it's quite interesting. I wanted a launch escape tower, obviously, because, well, a lot of my vehicles tend to flip out in this series, and I don't want to kill a Kerbal. So, yeah. Anyway, this is going pretty well. We're up at about 4 kilometers. I'm going to hit the abort soon. There we go. It drags us away from the rocket. However, the launch escape system is destroyed, but it actually looks okay. So we're going to pull the chutes now and hopefully land. That solid rocket booster should carry on and land somewhere in the hills, hopefully. Not land on the VAB or somewhere like that. That'd be pretty bad. But anyway, the chutes pull, and it looks like 2 will be more than enough to land this single man pod. But anyway, now that we have a launch escape system, we should start working on a rocket. So I'm going to hand you over to past me in the VAB to go and look at the first rocket we'll be launching with a Kerbal. So you've just seen the testing of the Phoenix vehicles, the escape testing and parachute testing, to make sure our Kerbals will survive. So now we're going to look at Phoenix 2. Phoenix 1 was actually the abort test. Maybe that should have just been a prototype, and this should be Phoenix 1. But hey, it's already named, so yeah. So yes, this is Phoenix 2, the rocket that will be taking Kerbals to orbit. So let's take a look at it. Let's go from the bottom up, as per usual. We're using some slightly different launch-based clamps, just because why not? They look kind of cool. So we're going to throw them away. So the engine, the LR189 series engine. This is actually an Atlas engine, I believe from the earlier Atlas vehicles, but I'm actually not super sure on that. I don't know a ton about Atlas the Atlas launch vehicles. But yes, this is rather useful. It provides 759 kilonewtons of thrust. It burns kerosene and liquid oxygen, as many of our first stages do. Now, of course, it does have these little structural wings for stability. Hopefully that will provide enough stability. They are quite small. I'm trying to make them smaller and slowly phase them out, because I don't really like them. Anyway, let's move to the second stage. In between this payload fairing, this engine fairing, you can see we have another one of these LE5 series engines. So yes, this is the same as on the previous vehicle. It performed so well that I decided to keep it. It is the Japanese engine, and I really like it. Of course, still burning liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. But yes, let's move on to the Capsule now. Up here we have the Capsule, which is just a Mark 1 pod. It's actually a lot like the Mercury Capsule, but it's not the Mercury Capsule. There is actually a model for that in, there is a model for that in this mod pack, but I decided not to use it because, well, I'm not doing the doing the NASA thing. I'm doing my own thing. It just so happens I need a one-person pod, and it looks a lot like the Mercury command module. It's carrying a 2-meter heat shield, of course. Inside it there is a little bit of HTP and RCS. And then on top, of course, the abort system. These are S2 ullage motors, usually used for, well, ullage, which is forcing fuel to the back of the tank so that it can be, well, to the bottom of the tank so that it can be fed into the engine, because in a weightless environment, the fuel tends to float around and be quite unstable. But I'm using them for my abort system because they have quite a lot of thrust. I've actually forgotten how much, but we can go and look right now. Yes, so it's this it's actually SLL ullage, but I guess it's S2 or S11 ullage. Anyway, it's actually the Saturn's ullage motor, so it's quite a big engine, and it provides 100 kilonewtons of thrust. So in total, this is 200 kilonewtons, which is really important because, well, we need a lot of thrust to weight ratio. This provides about 8 Gs of thrust. And there's a little more thrust on this side than this side, so it tips to the right to escape the vehicle in an event of an explosion, because a lot of my vehicles have been flipping out, so I am taking no chances. And I'm just using a few of these structural, but really not very aerodynamic, now I think about it, girders to hold them. So yes, hopefully that'll stop anything, pull it away from a rocket. Also, there's some parachutes there. They're just a double parachute. Anyway, let's go and see this fly right now. So here we are on the pad with the Phoenix 1, that's what it's called. And we're launching now on that Atlas engine. I've forgotten the name of it, but yes, it's going skyward. Rather small rocket, but it's working pretty well. Thrust to weight ratio looks good. Everything looks pretty stable. However, when I start turning, I slightly overturn and I lose control of the rocket. But luckily, we have that launch escape system, and it pulls us cleanly away from the rocket. There's a lot of explosions. We almost get hit by debris, but it looks as if the launch escape system has done its job. I'm actually pretty glad I got to use the launch escape system because I really wanted to see it work. And yes, there we go. Now Jebediah will be safe. I did almost get clobbered by debris, though. That was a little bit scary. But yeah, I reacted quickly, and we got away. So yeah, rockets do flip out. I'm going to need some bigger fins on that one. But at least there is no loss of life. So now we'll just descend down to the ground while we watch all of the other things fall to the ground and slam into it. And actually, just here, we almost get hit by some debris. You can see something comes pretty close to us, pretty fast. But yeah, you can see that little bit just there that hit the ground. That was pretty close. This was pretty dangerous because there was an exploding rocket around. But we did survive, and nothing killed us. So yeah. Anyway, let's upgrade the rocket a little bit and try again. This is the Phoenix 3 mission, of course. Last time was Phoenix 2. And we've got some slightly bigger fins on there. We're going to fly a little more gently and try to go to orbit, which will be rather nice, having a Kerbal in orbit, beating the no one else competing with us. We're just doing this for fun. There's no Russia. Maybe we should launch out of Russia. We should launch out of more places. All of my launches so far have been out of Cape Canaveral, Florida, but nothing but nowhere else so far. But there are some potentially better launch sites we're going to the moon I might try out. But anyway, now the first stage is burning out and we ditch that, move on to our second stage. We're going to get rid of that launch escape system just right now. We actually picked up a bit of a spin there accidentally, so we're going to have to wait until we're rotated prograde to actually fire up the engine, and then we should be able to carry on. You can see I'm actually having quite a lot of trouble controlling this, but we do get it going. I've used a bunch of the ignitions, but luckily this engine has 16 ignitions, so we should be fine. We've still got 12 left. We've picked up a bit of a roll, nothing I can really do about that since I only have one engine and no reaction wheel. Yeah, it's all looking good. However, at this point, I'm starting to think I might be a little bit short of Delta V for getting to orbit. I'm starting to worry. And also because this is the first mission that is quite simple, there is no service module on the Capsule. So the second stage will have to deorbit us. So we're going to have to be a little careful, because if I get to orbit and run out of Delta V, then we're stuck in space, pretty much. Maybe I could get out and push, but I'd rather not. But yes, it is looking at this point that I won't actually make it to orbit. I will be going suborbital, but annoyingly, I will be going suborbital and very fast, so it'll actually be a very steep ascent. I stopped with about 90 meters per second Delta V left in the tanks. Then I elect to fire it up again, because it won't actually put me in orbit, but it'll make the descent slightly less steep. So yes, this is actually accidentally a lot like the first Mercury mission with Alan Shepard. Just a suborbital hop. No orbital mission today, which is actually kind of fitting. At this point, I'm just figuring out the RCS, because I do have RCS in this pod. It's built in, and it's burning HTP. Well, I guess it doesn't really burn HTP in an RCS thruster, but you know what I mean. And we get ourselves orientated retrograde so that we can descend. We spent very little time in space, and I did time warp through all of it because I was a little bit hasty. Anyway, now we're just using the RCS to keep us orientated correctly through re-entry, and hopefully even on the steeper trajectory the heat shield should hold up, and it's looking actually pretty good. We're barely losing any ablator right now, but it is at 80 kilometers, so it is a little dicey. But you can see here at 30 kilometers we're actually doing okay, and we do get through the heating okay. And it turns out I'm actually going to land off the east coast of Africa in Madagascar, totally by accident, but that's pretty cool. And now we're just touching down. But we're going to need a slightly bigger rocket and a slightly just better everything. So I'm going to hand you back over to Past Me to discuss the next manned mission, which will hopefully get to orbit. So here we are at Phoenix 4. You saw Phoenix 2, which was a very short mission. You saw Phoenix 3, which was a slightly longer but not orbital mission. And now we are at Phoenix 4, which will hopefully be our first orbital mission. Now the rocket is basically the same. It is just a little taller to provide more Delta V, since obviously we need that. The wings have been expanded since the first mission, as you can see. But yes, this is largely the same, except it just has slightly taller tanks, as you can see from... This is Phoenix 2 right here. You can see it is slightly taller. And there's also a high utilization in the tanks, which means there's just it's denser with fuel in there. So we just have a lot more Delta V, so we'll definitely get to orbit. So yeah, I'll throw that away now that you can see it's slightly taller. But the main thing you'll notice, because the whole rocket is pretty much the same, so we can just skip over that. The main thing you'll notice is there is now a service bay in between these this payload, this interstage fairing. There's a service bay. So Phoenix 3, or well, actually Phoenix 2, was supposed to get to orbit and just do a basic thing, and the second stage would deorbit it. And then the second orbital mission would have its own service module. But since the first one didn't quite get to orbit, I thought I might as well just carry on with the plan, like acting as if it was an orbital mission. So yes, this has a very basic propulsion system. It just has some MMH and NTO, which I've forgotten. I don't really what is it? Menomethyl hydride something? It doesn't matter. Yeah. Anyway, and yes, a couple of 0.5 kilonewton thrusters, which, weirdly enough, are actually 0.9 kilonewton thrusters. So they're these, just the ones at the very top, and they provide... Actually, yeah, I swear they provide way more thrust than that. I swear it's 0.9, even though it says 0.5, whereas the 1 kilonewton thruster only provides 0.5, even though it says 1.1. That's bullshit, but yeah, that's basically the only update to this rocket, is this little service bay. Service module. So yeah, let's go and see this fly right now. I guess this mission isn't actually technically manned, it's woomanned, because we have Valentina at the helm. She will be the first Kerbal, hopefully, to go to orbit, because affirmative action. No, I'm joking, just because Jeb's already had his flight. He's had multiple flights, actually. He aborted out of one and landed in Madagascar in the other, so we're having none of his shit today. Although that probably is the fastest anyone's ever gone from Florida to Madagascar, so I guess it's actually a bit of a demonstration of Elon Musk's idea, except with an unreusable rocket and totally by accident. But hey, pretty good. It's a hole-in-one, a Madagascar in one. Anyway, yes, we follow pretty much the same launch trajectory, obviously just with our slightly bigger rocket. We decoupled the launch escape system a little earlier just to give us a little more Delta V in that first stage, so that we can actually push all the way on into orbit. And that's quite important because it is very heavy and it does hamper us quite a lot to keep carrying that around with us. It does, however, mean in the final stages of the first stage ascent, and of course the second stage ascent, there is no abort system. However, we wouldn't have one in the second stage of the mission anyway, so it's not too much of a problem. Anyway, it looks like we definitely will get to orbit. We've got more than enough delta V. It's going to be about 160, 170 kilometers, which is pretty good. Just a little bit above the atmosphere. I think in this, in Realism Overhaul, the atmosphere ends at about 140 kilometers, which is, I think it should be more like 160 kilometers, because it's 100 miles is the Kármán line in real life, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Anyway, yeah, so everything's looking good. We're gonna carry on into orbit. It has been a little less successful the last few missions than I've hoped they would be after the initial failure and the second failure to get to orbit. But well, all of that doesn't matter now, since our Kerbal is now in orbit. Rather nice, Valentina here, very happy to be here. Now we're going to decouple the second stage and try and move around with our service module. The RCS, of course, all working. And everything else. Now we're going to try and fire up these engines, and they won't fire up for some reason. Now, it turns out these are pressure-fed engines, and this tank can't exert any pressure, I think. I try and spin up the spacecraft a little bit in a second to try and induce ullage, because I thought maybe it was just that the fuel wasn't flowing to the engines, but it turns out there just isn't enough pressure from the tank, because it's a balloon tank, not a service module tank. So these engines will not work, which means we are stuck in orbit, which is not fantastic for our first, in quotes, successful mission. So just to confirm that I am right about this, I went back to the KSC, leaving Valentina in orbit for a little bit, fired up some engines on a mock-up of the service module on the Phoenix 4, and we attempt to fire up the engines, but the throttle won't go up because the engines are not working because there is no pressure to them. Then I loaded up with a new service module with a pressurized tank, and the engines work fine. So it looks as if I've used the wrong fuel tank. I mean, the engineers, it wasn't my fault. Yeah, I kind of fucked up here. Didn't really think about that. So yeah, we need to figure out how to get back, because we can't really send a rescue mission. We don't have rendezvous technology yet. At least I haven't attempted it yet, so I wouldn't want to do it for the first time outside of a real mission, so we're going to have to get inventive so the video's more interesting. So, yeah, anyway, first thing I do is decouple the service module, give myself a little bit of impulse backward. And now what I'm going to try and do is use the RCS to deorbit me. However, it is only for turning, it is not actually for translating your craft. So when I try and induce a turn, I actually induce a roll and a yaw. And then I try and just kind of keep spinning it up using the thrusters. But I'm never going to get anywhere like this. So I get out and push. I really didn't want to do this because it's a bit unrealistic. But I also didn't want Valentina to die in space. So yeah, we got her out. We're going to start pushing. The problem with this always is that, of course, the pod rotates when you push on it. And I try this a couple more times, and I get about 10 kilometers off my periapsis for each push until the spacecraft is rotating too much. I'm going to try this again now. You can see our periapsis is now at 171 kilometers, and now we're going to push on the back of the heat shield again, hopefully not tearing off any of it, because that would be rather bad. But it keeps starting to rotate, and this gets a little tedious, so after much pushing like this, I actually just engage SAS on the pod, and it turns out it will hold its direction even when the Kerbal is not in the pod. So you can see it's burning its RCS there to keep it pointed forward, and we get the periapsis down to 70 kilometers. This, however, is problematic because now I might not have enough HTP fuel for the thrusters to keep it orientated in the early stages of descent, which means it might go into re-entry rotating. However, you can see here we do actually get to a reasonable place where we're aerodynamically stable just after the fuel burns out and all is okay, and descent actually goes well, and we land, I think, in somewhere in America again, maybe Texas again, or Mexico. But anyway, now we're launching Phoenix 5, the final rendition of the Phoenix missions. I didn't talk you through this craft because it's basically the same, just with a new tank and some solar panels, because the 5th mission was also supposed to test power systems. So yes, this is the final mission of the Phoenix, well, the final Phoenix mission, which is crewed by Jebediah Kerman, and which the launch will be mostly cut through because you've seen it a bunch today and I didn't want to bore you or myself. So yes, here we are in orbit, and the spacecraft is working. The engines are working. However, it's a slightly heavier spacecraft when we didn't quite make it to orbit with the second stage, so we used the service module to actually push ourselves on into orbit. So another partial failure. We should call this Real Solar System Project Luna Episode 2 Partial Failures. But no, we do get into orbit. Yeah, even the perfect mission did not go perfectly. But the engines are working, we should be able to deorbit under our own power. The solar panels deploy and produce almost enough electricity to support the Kerbal, because of course we are using TAC life support. But yeah, there we go. The Phoenix missions are over. I think we've gotten 3 Kerbals to space today, 2 of which stayed in orbit, 1 almost were way too long. Anyway, we get out and do an EVA as well, because that's part of the test as well, and we actually start to see that there's actually reflections in his visor, which is really cool. I didn't realize I'd installed that because I used CCAN, but you can see the spacecraft in his visor, which is really cool. Seriously, the KSP modding community just blows me away constantly. Like, any modders watching, you're all just like, amazing. Anyway, we do a little bit of orbiting. We fly over Mexico and South America, and some of Central America as well, and then we turn around and deorbit. We spent a few orbits in space and obviously did our EVA and all of our tests, but this mission is successful, and we can conclude this rather dangerous program, which has almost killed 2 Kerbals and not been overly successful. Next time we can move on to bigger and better things. I was actually going to send some probes to fly by the moon today, but it took longer to get a spacecraft to just go to orbit and then come back with a Kerbal in it than I thought it would. I didn't expect to actually have to do 5 missions, but still. Anyway, we get a good deorbit. We fly actually over, I guess over the Philippines, and then sort of near Hawaii. Hopefully we won't set off a missile warning. I am seriously sorry if you're in Hawaii. That must have been horrifying. Anyway, though, we land in the ocean and all is good. And that is the end of the episode. Like I said, I was going to do some moon stuff today, but this took a while, and I actually quite enjoyed just doing a bunch of manned things. We've learned a lot today, we've failed a lot today, but you learn from your failures. So yes, I hope you've enjoyed this, I hope you're enjoying the series so far, and next time we will actually be sending some probes by the moon, and also some better manned stuff, so yeah. Like I said, I hope you've enjoyed this. This has been KSP with Tape. I will see you next time.